We're excited to be joined by Preston Guy, a staff writer covering LSU football and recruiting at tigerbait.com. Also, check out Tiger Bait on YouTube. Great stuff over there as well. Preston, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Glad to talk some football as always.
Excited to have you on. An exciting program right now with LSU, making some noise with the transfer portal, big time recruiting class coming in. They're working on another big time recruiting class. So a lot of new faces and a lot of things to cover with this team. I want to start with some coaching here because we know in the past, Coach Saban, Les Miles, and Coach O all won a national title in their third year at LSU. Brian Kelly just wrapped up his third season. So two-part question here for Brian Kelly. How would you grade his tenure so far? And then on top of that, how much pressure is there for him to deliver in 2025?
Yeah, so obviously Brian Kelly's grade started very high and has been sliding back. Okay, so mind you, this grade I'm about to give is not based on his 2024 performance. Collective, the thing to weigh in with Brian Kelly here is he inherited an absolute dumpster fire of a roster at LSU. Ed Ogeron left the cabinet empty. That was a 6-7 football team he left. And for the bowl game against Kansas State, LSU had 38 healthy scholarship players available for that game. So basically, Brian Kelly inherited a team that was going to go 3-9 that year if he didn't do something. Now, granted, this isn't 2008. And if you get a team with 38 scholarship players, you're talking about a rough rebuild, right? Because you might get 3 or 4 players out of a transfer, a grad transfer or whatever, but guys, you had the transfer portal set up. So he was able to use these tools successfully. So in his first year, he comes out and wins the SEC West, beats Alabama, and wins 10 games. Does it again in 2023 with the third most prolific offense in SEC history in Jane Daniels, Heisman winner. But you pair that with a historically bad defense and you get a pretty mediocre team is what the end result was. So LSU goes 9-3, wins a bowl game, 10 wins again. This time no SEC West title. And then last year you lose all that offense, but your defense improves a good bit. Not enough to really take a step forward, and LSU goes 8-4. So that's a pretty disappointing season for year 3, and it's disappointing that you're going in the wrong direction. So I would give Brian Kelly overall a B- is what I would give him. A lot of people want to throw him under the bus and write him off. This year will do a lot for me in terms of judging him as a coach. Can he fit at LSU? Obviously, he's the most accomplished coach LSU's ever hired, not like at the time of hiring. Obviously, LSU hired Nick Saban, but Nick Saban wasn't Nick Saban in 2000. It was a very different conversation. But Brian Kelly's far more accomplished, and now questions are starting to happen. If he can't get it done now, is this just going to be a perpetual 8-9 win type situation? Is Brian Kelly the guy with the ceiling? Because he never broke through that ceiling at Notre Dame. And the thought was, at least the thought I had, was Notre Dame was the program with the ceiling. Now, we haven't seen them break past what Brian Kelly accomplished, but we saw them match what Brian Kelly was able to accomplish in 2012, and ostensibly, basically, same quality team. He was able to put 2 other playoff teams together at Notre Dame. But now at LSU, with an SEC grind, some questions start to come. And frankly, he's got the roster at a point. This is his most talented roster he's had in LSU, and that includes 2023 was an offense that featured 4 first-round draft picks on it, by the way. So that just tells you about that defense, how little talent was on that other side of the ball. That this team, it's not even a question, this team is more talented than the 2023 team. So this is his best roster, and really there's no excuse. I mean, last year, I think once information started coming out about the NIL problems LSU was having, and, basically LSU paid for an 8-4 roster and got an 8-4 team last year. And once those issues came out, people were like, okay, well, let's get him some money and resources and see what we can do to fix this. Well, he's got it now. So there really just is no excuses for him at all not to make the playoffs this year. LSU is a program that is good enough. It should be one of the top 12 teams in the country year in, year out.
Specifically, one guy I want to talk about a lot on defense, because you said the defense has improved, and I have been hearing Harold Perkins has been the talk of the town of
Yeah.
that defense since he got there, and I just haven't seen it yet, except for that 1 year, and then I'm not sure what happened with him. I believe he got hurt last year. I know he missed the game against us when we played you guys last year in the Swamp. I think the offense, like you said, is going to be fine. I think this is really going to be on the defense coming in, and Harold Perkins is another guy that was thought of as a high draft prospect again, so he's got pressure on him for his own self and his draft prospect, but then also how does he fit into this defense?
Yeah, well, specifically Harold Perkins is a bit of an enigma. He's obviously just oozing with talent. He talked about his closing speed. There's a lot of tackles that he has made on the edge that are just special. It looks like almost like a corner with the kind of speed and ability to come and then actually make the tackle. The problem is finding a role where he's able to thrive. He initially burst onto the scene against Arkansas in 2022 as a true freshman. He wasn't ready to play linebacker. They put him as an outside, it was a jack rusher, right? He was basically a third down rushing specialist, and Arkansas had no answers for him. And he looked good throughout the end of the year. And the expectations were he's going to transition. He's going to learn the full positional linebacker, and he's going to be a stud in 2023. He was anything but. He could not make an impact. Nobody on that defense was making a special impact. He just was a piece there. And there were some things he did well. He always grades particularly high in zone coverage, but they tried him at middle linebacker, and then it didn't look good, so they switched him back to jack. They tried it again last year. Okay, now third year's the charm. We're going to move you into inside linebacker because you are a 6'2", 220-pound player. You're not the guy who we want lowering a shoulder on offensive tackles and getting outside leverage, right? You're a guy who needs to be running vertically. You have so much speed and talent. You need to be an inside backer. Well, it was okay last year, but it was nothing spectacular. And then he got hurt, right? And frankly, a lot of people will point out that the defense improved after he got hurt. And we saw the emergence of Whit Weeks really take off, and he was making special plays for LSU last year. So again, it's one of those deals where LSU's never really questioned the talent with him. However, the productivity's just never been consistent with him. Never once. So he comes back for his senior year. Great decision on his part to stick around and come back because he has nothing on tape to really suggest he should be a high draft pick yet in the NFL. So he does decide to come back, and the word is they're going to try him at star, which is a special position in this Blake Baker defense here for LSU, where it's a safety, but it's a safety that plays up close to the line scrimmage and run support, right? It's almost similar to a 4-line, like a 3-4 type front, okay? Except for it is technically a fifth defensive back. So he will technically be playing defensive back, and he's going to have to go cover tight ends on the inside. But it plays like a linebacker. A lot of aggressive blitzing on the edge, and there's a lot of buzz that with how high he grades in zone coverage as a linebacker and, his closing speed on the edge, this could be a perfect fit. And then, of course, there's the question of he has that ACL injury. How well does he recover from that? And how quickly does he recover from that? Because that's a mixed bag. I mean, some guys come back from the ACL and they're Adrian Peterson and they're better than they ever were before. And then some guys lose a half step and they're never the same.
Yeah, sounds like big nickel transition in the NFL.
Very similar to that type role, yes.
I always thought that almost felt like the position that seemed most natural for him would be in a package of plays in that, like outside, like a big nickel, almost seems like the perfect fit for him. I'll be really excited to see if they can kind of unlock that for him this year in that role. I want to shift to the offense for a second here. LSU lost 4 of its top 5 receivers from the 2024 squad. I think that made it a priority to really add some pass catching talent in the transfer portal. Brian Kelly and his staff signed 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. Tell us about these additions in the passing game. Look,
between the returning receivers and what they added in the portal, all of a sudden receivers looking like from what was a position of problem last year because they had injuries last year, but the receiving core was bad, objectively bad for LSU. And despite that, Nussmeier had a 4,000-yard passing season, and he finds himself as college football's leading returning passer. He's the only quarterback returning with 4,000 yards passing. So obviously some special things there, but we're talking about a guy who did not throw 30 or more touchdowns last year. that's a little strange to see that few touchdowns with a 4,000-yard season, and a guy who threw too many interceptions. I believe he threw 13 interceptions or 12 interceptions last year, including notably 3 against Texas A&M, which probably cost them the game against them. So receiver was an emphasis for them in the portal. Aaron Anderson was LSU's leading receiver a year ago. He comes back. Now, Aaron Anderson is a short target guy. He is a 5'8" receiver, and he's fast, but he's not like, a Percy Harvin speed, for Mr. Alex there. He'll catch that one, right? Or who was the other speedster guy back then who would go side by side with Trinity? Yeah, he's no Jeff Demps, okay? But very fast nonetheless. We're talking about a guy who's going to run a full 440 probably at the combine this year. So he comes back. He's been clutch at times. I think he's a great weapon. That being said, he's not doing your goal line fades. We're talking about a small body receiver. He needs compliments. I don't think it's a shot at him. I think it just is what it is. So LSU has this receiver, Chris Hilton. The stories of Chris Hilton in practice. Every year, I look like a gosh darn idiot because I go on my show and I tell everybody, Chris Hilton, deep ball threat is special. And then all through the regular season, he disappears for one reason or another. In 2023, you had Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. You kind of get why every other receiver took a back seat to those guys. But Chris Hilton had some sort of nagging injury. So in 2023, he had a season-ending injury, or I say regular season ending because he came back for the bowl game against Ole Miss. It was like a torn hamstring pull or something like that. And then in 2024, he had a preseason injury, and he was listed as week to week until like week 11 this year. That being said, in both bowl games for the last 2 years, he was phenomenal. He looked like the best receiver on the football team. So that's a massive X factor for this receiving core. But I believe Brian Kelly took the mindset of this guy's been so inconsistent that we cannot rely on him. If you get some out of him, that's extra. But we need to treat it like he's injured, basically. So they went to the portal and they invested and they got some guys. Lo and behold, now you've got Barry and Brown transfer out of Kentucky, talking about a real elite deep threat. Nick Anderson, who was hurt last year, by the way, for Oklahoma, but very talented as a true freshman for Oklahoma. So he'll come in and play for LSU, but we'll see what he looks like. And then you've got Xavion Thomas, a guy who came in last year, and he was more of a utility weapon, a guy you used in bubble screens and jet sweeps, but he's very fast. And he's a great kick returner as well. So a lot of good guys. And then there's Kyle Parker, who was very impressive in spots last year. He also got hurt. So very consistent trend at that receiver spot last year. They got hurt. And then I'm going to throw one more name at you, Jelani Watkins, who is currently having a freshman season to remember on the track field. Now, I told you that Aaron Anderson was fast, but he wasn't Jeff Demps fast. Jelani Watkins is Jeff Demps fast. I would love to see him get something going. In spring he was focused on track and mostly, so he didn't really show up there. And last year he was a true freshman. But that's a guy you got to watch out because he is elite speed. I'm talking 10:01 100-meter elite speed. So this receiver room, I think there's 2 rooms that are particularly stacked for LSU. It's the receiver room and the edge rusher room. Both of them look fantastic for LSU thus far.
So with that being said, the real question seems to be that offensive line. Obviously, we know what you lost, the big guy that ended up getting drafted by the Patriots. But right now, if I'm not mistaken, I think you have 2 freshmen and then 3 redshirt sophomores that are starting, which they could be good maybe in a year because, again, these are all guys that are just started. I think that might be, at least from my perspective, that might be the biggest question on the team.
Offensive line is the big question mark for this team, and it's not a good one to have, especially considering you don't have a mobile quarterback. Now, he's an improvising quarterback, but he's no Joe Burrow. He will roll out and buy some time, and he will make some wild throws, some unhinged throws. And that's where those 12 interceptions come into play, but sometimes he completes them, and it's crazy. Ole Miss, notably, is a fun game last year where he was cooking with those wild throws. That being said, he needs time to throw. And last year's offensive line was very good at pass blocking, horrible at run blocking last year. Now, 4 of those guys got drafted. That being said, You brought in 2 guys who had a 5-star designation from someone. Look, when the talk about stars comes up every year, there's so many different recruiting services. If one labels them a 5-star, I'm just saying they had a 5-star designation somewhere. So Carius Kern comes in and he is a nasty mauler. Does he come in and have a chance to fight for a starting role? Well, we'll see. But notably at offensive line, they went heavy in the portal. Braylon Moore, true center out of Virginia Tech. Center was a big problem for LSU last year with DJ Chester, and he's your one returning offensive lineman. So the thought is there they want to move him to guard and maybe work in a true center, and that'll do the trick to make DJ Chester a good SEC offensive lineman. However, in spring practice, we didn't see any of these newcomers make the starting lineup. Not one of the transfer portal guys, and they're bringing in veterans like Braylon Moore. This isn't a guy who transferred to LSU to be a backup for his last year. Okay, guys like Josh Thompson, big guard transfer from Northwestern. We're talking about an all-conference performer. Not a guy you think you brought here to come be a backup. But they didn't sniff the starting lineup. They went with all returning players across that offensive line. It was a strange move to me because some of these returning guys are guys that haven't really played or struggled, like Paul Mabinka. He started in relief for injured players last year, but he didn't look great. Bo Bordelon's a guy who they put back in there, a guy who hasn't really played in his time here at LSU. So it's a little bit strange that they brought in all these highly coveted 5-star guys and veteran offensive linemen, and you didn't see him crack the starting lineup in spring. I greatly suspect that the starting 5 we saw in spring will not be the starting 5 we see in game 1 this year. Now, I don't know what the strategy is behind that. I don't know if they genuinely think. I don't know if it's a culture thing. You got to come and earn it. I don't care if you're a highly paid transfer portal guy. I don't care. I don't know what it was, but I do know this. They got their butts whooped all spring. I think in the spring open practice game, whatever you want to call it, I believe they gave up 7 in the sessions where they're going, basically in between the 20s is what they're going there, the open part of it. So a lot of concern for this offensive line. If you don't improve your offensive line play from what we saw in spring, I don't think this is a playoff team. That being said, I so severely doubt that starting 5 we saw is the actual starting 5. I so severely doubt that I really don't want to write them off because of that.
I heard some reports that the kid out of Northwestern supposedly is the real deal.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if he doesn't crack the lineup. But yeah, when you lose 4 NFL quality linemen in 1 April, that's a incredible loss of talent. LSU had one of the best offensive lines in the country. So big shoes to fill there for the offensive line. And it makes me shift here to the quarterback because like you mentioned with Nussmeier, this guy's a big-time quarterback, and I think there's some really big expectations for him this season. For those who maybe aren't familiar with his game, maybe they didn't catch LSU last year, what makes him special? And then on the opposite side here, where does he also need to improve?
Yeah, Nussmeier he's a gunslinger, although when we interview him, he gets mad if we ever say that. He is a coach's son, Doug Nussmeier, Saints offensive coordinator, and by the way, quarterback coach for the Philadelphia Eagles last year. Veteran coach guy, so Nussmeier just has football mentality drilled into him. He shines in front of the media. He's a quality young man. I've enjoyed covering him now for about 7 years because this is his 5th year and then 2 years of being a recruit. And he's a very polished. He has as good of arm talent as anybody as you're going to see out there. I mean, he likes to throw the ball deep. At times, he really couldn't do that last year because the receivers weren't open, but he had some accuracy issues on deep balls when they were open last time. I think that's a little bit reflective of the lack of chemistry with guys coming in and out with injuries, such as his main deep ball guy he likes to go to, Chris Hilton, basically wasn't available there to the ball game. So that's a big hit to your chemistry with these guys. But that being said, he was throwing the ball all over the place. And many times, Nussmeier's right arm was the offense for LSU because your receivers aren't exactly getting open and taking it for a lot of yak. Okay, your running game basically gave you nothing all last year. You had the 109th run game. And a lot of times it was, hey, we're going to get the ball, go down to the red zone, and we're not going to score a touchdown because we can't run the ball when we get there. And Nussmeier did struggle a bit in the red zone as well last year. It's tougher to pass in the red zone when you have that short field and you don't have the top to take over, but it's even tougher to pass when they know basically every down you're not getting a consistent run threat. You cannot rely on this team to get 3 yards in the running game last year. So that made the defense take a very one-dimensional approach to their red zone defense last year, and it was tough for Nussmeier. So I'm giving context, but these are why he struggled. And then I'll say, notably, probably the monkey on his back through his entire career has been the negative plays. You tried too much to make something there, and you threw an interception. He started the season off doing very well. I think in his first 6 games, he had 1 interception. But then down the stretch, he just 3 interceptions against A&M, and then he just had interception after basically consecutive straight games with interceptions. You got to cut back on those. That being said, those are 3 issues I just named. I really think if he polishes up those 3 issues and he turns those if he were to somehow take those weaknesses and turn them into strengths and his supporting cast improved, I think we're looking at a Heisman-type season for Nussmeier. I'm not saying he will be a finalist, but I think he will find himself in the conversation if he improves those issues.
The outlook for this season now, I asked on the last pod, we've been having a bunch of college guys on and ladies. I want to ask you, you let me know if you're ready to divulge or not. What do you think is going to happen on September 13th against Florida? That's a selfish promoting thing. What do you think is going to happen? But it's you guys are at home.
All right, we'll talk about Florida. So game comes back to Baton Rouge, which is obviously a huge deal. I don't think I've ever seen the Florida game played this early. Yeah, that's wild to me.
That's true.
So I think that Florida probably has the most talented quarterback in the SEC. A kid that I love, who I covered in recruiting, Lagway, very high quality young man as well. And I loved what he did last year. He was very gimpy against LSU last year and somehow pulled a win out of the hat. And it was just a very frustrating game where LSU dominated time of possession and actually, I think, had 100 more yards than Florida, yet somehow found itself on the losing end, and that's because of LSU's red zone woes. I would like to see a little bit out. I mean, we're not going to get to see much out of either team before we get to see them there, but I would like to see that. Particularly, I think LSU is going to have a lot of importance on that game, especially if LSU comes out and loses its 6th straight opener against Clemson. Yeah, that doesn't sound good at all, does it? Yeah, it's cringy to think about that, especially for a team with pride like LSU. But if LSU finds itself 1-1 coming into that Florida game, you best believe LSU will. I mean, they're going to roll out everything they can to get that game. You cannot start this season 1-2 when there's this much pressure to make the playoffs. I would say LSU needs that win in a big way. But I mean, Billy Napier is going to be coaching for his life every game this year. So, I think they made the right call by sticking with him, particularly that Florida team at the end of the year was not the same team at the beginning of the year. So we'll see. I really do think Florida is going to be good, but I really want to see how LSU gels together as a team before I really judge anything like that, because there's a lot of new faces and, look, you can get Bosch, D-Wade, and LeBron on the same team, and they might start 500 in their first, 20 games. That happens sometimes when you assemble a bunch of talent. It's not necessarily having the talent; it's how the talent plays together sometimes. Right. So we'll see.
I'll admit that was a little self-serving there, Brad. But looking at the schedule, right? So you go to Clemson, then you got La Tech. Okay, then like you said, we have Florida and Southeast Louisiana. Then it's Ole Miss, then South Carolina. Yeah. Vanderbilt's been good, so I don't know what Vanderbilt we're going to get this year. Yeah. But then you face Texas A&M, then Alabama. So it's a bit of a going. The SEC is a going.
It's a brutal schedule
for the most part, but it's like you don't have those 2 back-to-back games where it's like, okay, they're not necessarily cupcakes, but I'm confident going in. I'm confident. I bet the house that we'd win because there's Vanderbilt, then there's Texas A&M and Alabama. You have like a break, and then you face 2 teams that'll be vying for the same positions that you will be. And then you end with Western Kentucky and then in Arkansas. Then there's the Oklahoma at the end of the season. So these early games, especially against, I don't know what Ole Miss is going to look like without Dart, but the Florida and the Ole Miss games, those early games, and like you said, Clemson, those 3 early games seem to be very important because you don't get the back-to-back I don't want to say break. I want to be respectful. You don't get the back-to-back winnable games, confidence-building games. Let's just use that. And the rest of the season, it's like a confidence builder, then 2 back-to-back guys, like you have to be on your A game. So it's a bit of a gauntlet, and I know you're expecting to be in the top 12. If you guys are in the top 12, that means Nussmeier is definitely got to be a top 3 Heisman choice at that point, because he's going to be playing his arse off in order to be in position.
Well, hopefully your defense improves a little bit to where it doesn't have to rely on a 5,000-yard year from Nussmeier. But that is the word on the street. The defense does look a lot better. LSU was a defense that ranked in the 50s. But yes, it is a brutal schedule. That especially that opening gauntlet is just, you named 2 games in there that are certain wins, and that's Southeastern and Louisiana Tech, right? So it's just, here's the silver lining about a schedule like that. I did an analysis of LSU since 2000, right? And if LSU goes 10-2 or better, there's a 100% chance that this team will be in the playoffs. Every single LSU team that finished 10-2 or better was a high enough ranking to comfortably be in the playoffs. 9-3, those odds drop from 100 to about 20, basically 1 in 5 teams at LSU at 9-3 would have been good enough to make the playoffs. That being said, you have to do something special to be in the top 12 as an LSU playoff team, historically speaking. And I think this schedule gives you that opportunity to do that. And some people have Clemson as the number 1 team in the country. I mean, Clemson's going to be very, very good this year. Cade Klubnik is right up there with Nussmeier, Arch Manning, with best Heisman odds in the country. And again, that's going to be a wide open award this year. Don't be surprised if this is one of those years where someone comes out of nowhere to win the Heisman, because it's just so wide open this year. And it's just a gauntlet down the stretch. I mean, and a lot of these teams are good, but maybe not great. You think about like Alabama, obviously that's a very talented Alabama team, but we are talking about a team that lost 4 games last year, and you have to question where that program's going under DeBoer. You can see why a lot of these games are winnable. You don't have to look very far at all to see why a lot of these games are losable. Think about Diego Pavia on the road in Vanderbilt in front of only 60% of your fans for LSU. A lot of these games are going to be tough and hard to win this year. We'll have to see. Will 9-3 be good enough to make the playoffs? I don't know. But hopefully you don't even have to deal with that conversation. I definitely think this team has enough talent acquired to be a 10-2 or better team. But I guess the good silver lining is that 9-3 you would get a little bit of love from the pollsters for recognizing how tough that schedule.
Yeah, I was about to say with that schedule, that 9-3 that'll work in their favor.
If they go 9-3, or let's say even drop, let's say they drop 4 games, is Brian Kelly's seat just too hot to survive? I mean, would that be a
I like the way you said that. Too hot to survive, because he's not getting fired. But it might get too hot to survive long term. He will be the coach. If he goes 4-8, he will be. There's a, $7.6 million buyout as of December 1st. And look, LSU doesn't have that. LSU doesn't. They're locked into, they're married to Brian Kelly. So at least for 1 more year. Here's the standard for LSU. It's going to be a very simple one. Make the playoffs. That's it. Make the playoffs, or you will lose fan support. I think that in this era, losing fan support is particularly damning. It's more damning than it was, years ago. I mean, Les Miles he lost all the fan support in, I guess it would have been 2010. Okay, but then he was able to rally and rip off that 2011 team that was so good, and then 2 more 10-win seasons, and eventually he did fall off, but he was able to rebound from it, even though the fans thought he was a total dunce after that 2010 season and a couple down years, 09, 08, right? I don't know that that's going to be as easy to do. Okay, here, let me tell you, LSU had NIL issues where their collective raised about $5.5 million last year. So you're supposed to go out there and compete with the Ohio States of the world, who have allegedly a $20 million NIL budget, right? And you have 1/4 the budget. Well, LSU rallied this year, and Brian Kelly straight up said on signing day, look, guys, we missed on Bryce Underwood. Now, we still got some good guys. We got DJ Pickett, we got Harlem Berry, we got Solomon Thomas. We have a good recruiting class. But guess what? We lost on Bryce Underwood straight up because we just didn't have the NIL money. Now, from what I'm understanding, the offer Bryce Underwood was made wasn't being matched by anybody. It's life-changing money. It's money that, if my son's looking at, okay, LSU's offering you $1.5 million and Michigan's giving you $5 million a year, you're dumb. You're dumb if you don't go with that. And from what I understand, the Michigan offer is fully guaranteed. So LSU has almost tripled their NIL budget. They had a rallying call and they lined up some big donors to the collective, and they've been making some moves. And that is why we were able to see LSU pull in a top 5 recruiting class. And I believe what was designated the number 1 portal class in the country this year. And they needed it in a big way.
So, staying there with the NIL and recruiting, Austin Thomas, he's now returned, and I don't know how much of a part, obviously the coach is usually the face, and the quote unquote, these new college football GMs are coming in, they're kind of more behind the scenes. What role is he playing, and how much does he matter in the money aspect, and then where and how he's spending the money?
Austin Thomas, from what I'm understanding, has been fairly instrumental with organizing LSU's collective efforts. I've had people in the know tell me that he is the best GM in the country. And of course, mind you, this roster that Ole Miss built last year, remember Ole Miss had a lot of NIL money and built a very strong team, although it was a disappointing season. They lost to LSU and all that jazz, right? Austin Thomas built the Grove Collective, and he played a very strong role in that. Do I know what Austin Thomas's day in and day out things are? No, I don't have much contact with Austin Thomas, but everybody I do talk to raves about him. So that's all I'll say. I think this is his 3rd stint at LSU, and it looks like his 3rd stint is going to be one where he's also building up LSU's roster in a pretty good way. And look, because of that, and by the way, revenue sharing is about to be a huge part of college football very soon, and there's some doubt. There's some fogginess as to what the future of collectives even are. GMs in college football are about to be a big deal because you got to work out the finances in a big kind of way with these players, and if you don't, you are not going to have a team worth a damn. You got to do this. So I think Austin Thomas is a pretty good guy to have for your program.
Now, you mentioned that they had doubled its NIL budget with the fundraising efforts
almost
after the
tripled,
Bryce.
Actually,
right. After the Bryce Underwood situation, and that kind of sparked the team to kind of make that move. But how much concern is there for LSU being able to keep up financially when it comes to recruiting? You've got teams in your own conference like Texas and Texas A&M that have unbelievably deep pockets. But then on top of that, we know LSU recruits on a national level. So Ohio State, Oregon, some of these other teams that they find themselves in these recruiting battles with really deep pockets. Is there concern about being able to keep that NIL money flowing?
Yeah, there is. Absolutely. I mean, there are certain schools out there, the NIL money, Notre Dame, for one, is one that a lot of people, don't really talk about, and they don't have to disclose finances at all. So Notre Dame is one where it's like they've been able to build their team with that pretty well. Miami is a team that has a lot of money thrown out there. Oregon, Texas A&M, right? That being said, LSU is, trying to do what they can to compete and be among the elites with the NIL budget. I've heard some crazy numbers from this, but it's hard to really know what the exact numbers are for these NIL teams. But I can tell you LSU somewhere in the ballpark of $13.5 million this year. And that is, they feel, enough to compete. Obviously, you always want more. But it certainly was good enough to build the, number 1 portal class and a top 5 recruiting class. Wasn't enough to get Bryce Underwood to come too. But I don't think there was, you could have offered anything. I think Larry Ellison was writing a blank check. He didn't get $20 million is a drop in the bucket for him to bring in Bryce Underwood. But yes, it is a concern. And in my opinion, I think LSU is a program that would benefit tremendously from collectives actually being banned. Now, I don't know if that will actually come to fruition or not, but they would benefit tremendously if collectives went away and they did revenue sharing and NIL became more of okay, you can't just donate to a collective. You have to have a business and do this. And that way they have an organizer like a Austin Thomas lining up businesses with sponsoring NIL athletes and getting that actual quid pro quo. That's the part of collectives that get real fishy is okay, you got, they showed up to a charity event. Is that really true quid pro quo? Are you really getting something in return for that? But LSU would benefit from that, in my opinion, at least. But ultimately, LSU, one of the things that's always made LSU a special job is I believe LSU is one of 3 schools with a unique, special recruiting geography. That's Ohio State, that's Georgia, and that's LSU, and that they are in very talent-rich states with no one to split it with. Now, that's slightly disrespectful to Georgia Tech and Cincinnati, but you know what, man?
No, it's not.
Let's be real. Let's
No,
be
it's not.
real, okay?
No.
Programs. Tech is not beating Georgia for a recruit. I don't think
Right.
they've done it since Calvin Johnson, okay? My point being is that LSU has the state of Louisiana to itself. And then you look at the geography of the Texas schools and where they're at, how far away they are. The Mississippi schools are both north. LSU basically has a very recruiting soil. It's like the 5th most talent-rich state, maybe 6th or 5th most talent-rich state. Obviously not like on Florida, California, Texas level, but pretty darn good nonetheless. And that's how the equation to win at LSU has been simple. Build a fence and find a quarterback from out of state for the love of Christ and pair them with all this elite speed talent in the state, and you've got a championship equation. They're going to get the hometown discount on these players. Yes, they still have to pay them. Yes, occasionally, Jakeem Stewart, for example, last year is a guy who reclassified to 2025 at the last second. And he's a guy who's played 10 high school football games in his entire career, and USC is offering him $2 million. And they're going to lose guys like that from time to time because someone's going to want to overpay for your guys. And LSU has a strong, we're not going to overpay culture. We're going to pay what you're worth. And if you don't want to come, we're going to move on to the next guy. And it is what it is. But that being said, I still feel like LSU has a very competitive advantage bringing these guys to stay in state because they're taking the hometown discount.
Yeah, that was going to be, I was literally going to ask about Jakeem Stewart because I was looking at the state rankings, obviously out of the top 10, everybody basically stayed in state, whether they went to Ole Miss or Mississippi. They went to Ole Miss the next state over. They basically stayed in the area, except with the exception of Jakeem Stewart, who was the number 2, I believe number 2 in the state.
They did a really good job last year. Devin Harper was a guy who was committed to LSU for a very long time, and it's another guy who got a really good NIL offer, and LSU got to the point where they're like, you know what, go ahead. It's fine. Same thing with Jakeem Stewart. James Simon is a guy who LSU actually pulled off of late. LSU was in heavy on him, but there was another running back in the state who really came on strong. Of course, we all know about Harlem Berry, but LSU loved JT Lindsey out of Alexandria, and that was the 2 backs they went in on. So it was a running back heavy year. James Simon's going to be an excellent back. For the most part, LSU has done very well. There's probably another one, Jabari Antoine, they missed on in-state that they would have really liked to have. And that's probably the one where it's like, he got a richer NIL offer, but you probably screwed the pooch recruiting that kid, right? So LSU has done a good job recruiting in-state. Yeah, there was a couple kids that they missed on last year, but overall they are doing really well.
Yeah, you missed on him, but you landed Aiden Anding, so
Yes, Aiden Anding, right. So, they've done very well in-state.
Yeah, and in a top 10 freshman class for 2025, obviously impressive group that's going to be coming in. The number 7th class currently in 2026. They clearly are still landing some big-time recruits with all that being said. Now, Brian Kelly said recently at the annual SEC spring meetings, quote, "We want to compete against the Big Ten." He went on to say, look, the Big Ten right now holds it on the SEC. They won the last 2 national championships. That's the reality of it, end quote. What are your thoughts after hearing this?
I don't know that I care so much about him saying that the Big Ten has the upper advantage because, they've won the last 2 national championships. Cool. Great. That's fine. That's fair. Look, when the SEC won 6 straight national championships, what it was, maybe 12 out of 15 championships, there was nobody saying the SEC wasn't on top. So that's fine. What I look more into is the structure of a 9+1 Big Ten format. And my God, that is a gauntlet. We're talking 10 conference games from the most elite conferences, because right now it is the Big Ten, SEC, and everybody else, right? And certainly it would create more quality TV, but my first thought is this committee has got to be more forgiving of losses if they get that set up. And I know they have some 5+ 11 setup they're talking about for maybe an expanded playoff. And of course, a 16-team playoff, by the way, does open itself to having a tougher schedule like that, albeit I would argue that I'm more of a give me 8 kind of guy. Like I think 12 was too many. And I think the quality of games that we saw last year was evident about that. And you're looking at rosters of teams and it's like, okay, so Bama belongs in, yet they can't beat, 6-6 Oklahoma. The resumes just were not resumes of teams that compelled me to believe this is a team with a championship run in them. So, but I guess the bigger problem is the bowl games are flipping useless nowadays. And if you don't have an expanded playoff, you have a useless postseason now for college football. And that problem is only going to get bigger and bigger as this playoff gets bigger. And boy, I think these bowl games are about to be, they were a snooze fest last year. I can only imagine if 16 teams, basically anybody with a pulse in college football is going to be playing in the playoffs. So these bowl games are just going to be, I would argue maybe they shouldn't even count towards your record at a certain point, but it's rough. So yeah, we'll see on all that.
And I just think it's interesting that he said he wants to play the Big Ten. I think considering how tough we just talked about the LSU schedule, getting through the SEC is rough enough. Now he's opening the doors to, hey, let's go play some of these big programs in the Big Ten. Look, I'm all for it as a fan. Give me more great games. I'm excited to see this Texas-Ohio State matchup early in the season. Like, to me, it's just more good inventory of games. But from his standpoint, saying that was kind of eye-opening, going, wow, okay, coach, like, your seat's already a little warm. You really want to open up the door to more tough games to play here. It seemed a little crazy, but hey, I admire the confidence there. And I'm with you on the playoff. I don't really understand the whole thought about expanding it. I think it's inevitable. I think it is where we're going. And Greg Sankey coming out recently and saying, look, the Big Ten and SEC should have 4 automatic bids. They're basically saying, like, look, we're better than you and our teams deserve to be in automatically. I can't argue with them there, but it's fascinating how quickly the sport is changing right in front of our eyes right now.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. I mean, I hear what he's saying about, we're better and we know it, but it's like, I don't know. I just feel like I would like it if all 4 conferences got just 2 automatic bids, or better yet, let's just put the best 16 teams on the field or best 12 teams on the field and let it go. I do think that getting rid of the automatic buys for the best 4 conference champs, that's a colossal upgrade for college football. I mean, we saw how inequitable the playoff match. I mean, Oregon got screwed last year because of that. They got utterly screwed. They shouldn't have played Ohio State for their first game, but that's
while
what
Penn
they got.
State plays Boise State and SMU.
Right. Yeah, the playoff was a very weird year. Georgia with a backup quarterback, and then you get 2 teams. They didn't go with the traditional powers, Alabama, Ole Miss, and they went with the SMUs of the world. And for some reason, Boise backed their way into a bye. It was just, I think that the playoff structure maybe in years past with a true Power 5 may have worked. I just think with the new structure, just how chaotic everything is right now, it just is what it is. And look, let me tell you one thing I would like more about equitable spots, or at least like just, hey, look, let's just do conference champs plus, your best other teams, everybody else is in at large. At least it would give the other conferences a fighting chance instead of treating it like a power 2, a lesser 2, and then a irrelevant 4 or 5, whatever, a group of 5, It's just a little right now. It just doesn't sit right to me to give one conference special treatment because, well, we know they're better.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I understand he's looking out for his conference, and obviously Tony Petitti and the Big Ten is trying to look out for their conference and trying to position themselves to benefit, for their conferences to benefit, and that makes sense. But at the same time, I think I'm with you. I'm not sure it's for the greater good of the sport to be set up that way. And so it's definitely interesting. I also agree with you because Lane Kiffin came out, I believe, recently and said, look, let's just put the top 16 teams in.
Yeah. I think it really should be every conference gets a champion, at least your Power 4. Because what I'd like to prevent is, so your conference cannibalized itself and your champion for some reason went, 8-4 for some reason, but you all were just that good. That's what I'd really like to avoid, is the cannibalization. Give me at least your best from every conference, every Power 4 conference, that is. But don't give them buys. You don't get a buy in college basketball, or you don't get the number one seed because you won your conference. No, you get seated where you belong.
I like that too, because I think it also keeps some importance on winning your conference. You know, winning that championship still means something. Well, guys, we have been excited once again to be joined by Preston Guy. He is a staff writer covering LSU football and recruiting at tigerbait.com. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel as well for them. Preston, thanks again for coming on the show. It's been a blast.
All right, guys. Appreciate y'all for having me.
Thanks, son.